It's a common question to ask which driver is the best in Formula One's history. One that's not as much is who was the worst. Today we're going to go some way towards that by giving the best insight we can on who we believe are the 10 worst drivers of the 21st century so far. Welcome back to the Formula One Grid Talk podcast. We are powered by the F1 Chronicle. Visit f1chronicle.com for news, reviews and opinions on all things F1. Hosting today will be me, George Howson, and joining me today are sports engineering student Owain Medford.
Hello. How do
and F1 expert Alex Booth.
Hello.
So, gentlemen, I think we should start today with the news that's just come out today. Unfortunately, that just going away from the main topic of this podcast, the news that Sir Stirling Moss has so sadly passed away. I mean, Alex, give some insight on this guy, because a lot of people label him purely as the best man to never win the World Championship, but he was so much more than that, wasn't he?
It is. I mean, that's a fairly easy conclusion to reach. Everybody focuses on the fact that he just missed out on the World Championship and he's regarded as the greatest driver ever to have achieved it. But he's done so much more than that. I mean, he just in Formula One alone, his win percentage rate is absolutely incredible. I know there was a lot less races then than there are now, but he'd been there and done it. He won the Mille Miglia. He won in sport cars. He won in saloon cars then, as touring cars are now. And he went up against the great Fangio in the same team. Just lost out to Monaco 1961, and in those days it was 100 laps, and he beat the Ferraris with the sharp noses, and that was just an incredible achievement. And some still regard him as Britain's greatest ever Formula One driver. Obviously, we can't really compare him to Lewis Hamilton. It's totally different. It's totally different circumstances, different circuits, different team. But it's a huge loss for the world of motorsport.
Yeah, massive loss, and it is hard for people of our generation to kind of know how great he was, because obviously we weren't all born for like 30, 40, 50 years after he was racing Formula One cars. But Wayne, just try and sum up Moss, because he was an amazing driver. I mean, if it wasn't for drivers like Fangio, he definitely would have won the World Championship. In fact, 1958, he would have won it if he didn't give it up to Mike Hawthorne, because he believed he was unfairly penalised.
Yeah, and I think that gives you a sort of insight into the character of Stirling Moss as well. I think, it's one thing to be an amazing driver, and Stirling Moss was absolutely an amazing driver, both in Formula One and in other disciplines, such as like road rallying, like the Mille Miglia and things like that. But, the sort of, to have the wherewithal to be like, no, I'm not going to take the win. I'm not going to take the win just because it's going to benefit me. I think he's been unfairly penalised. I'll give that up and essentially, secure my own fate of not winning the championship this year. But he gave it up because he thought it was right, which I think is somewhat rare to see nowadays. And I do see sort of a lot of selfishness, which I don't criticise drivers for having that now, because you need to have it to get anywhere. But it's just interesting to see, just to look inside the personality of the man.
Yeah, a unique personality, and like you said, Owain, that just wouldn't happen nowadays. That would never happen, because the sport's moved on so much, obviously. But Dev, I think one of the things that you say in one of your articles to sum him up is that the name Sir Stirling Moss will always be associated with speed. His legend will far outlive him. People will be talking about him 100 years from now.
Yeah, I think what a sad day today, isn't it? We've lost such an incredible legend of our time. Somebody who was able to convert, I think, 16 race wins out of just 66 starts. And I was just looking up some of those stats. What an incredible achievement at the pinnacle of motorsport during those days of uncertainty. I would say uncertainty because, unlike today, where the electronics package and car development is at an all-time high, these were the legends who actually raised the bar for so many who followed later. Indeed, a tragic day. Sir Stirling Moss would be remembered absolutely in high regard anywhere he would go. I think in any generation, regardless of its heroes, regardless of its icons, this is a name which brought a sense of grandeur and also, must I admit, a sense of simplicity. Perhaps another downer these days of lockdown. We can't help but say that our hearts go out to this amazing English legend.
Yeah, absolute legend. Very well summed up there, Dev. I mean, yeah, rest in peace, Sir Stirling. Another legend has joined the Great Grand Prix in the Sky. Another one we've lost. 90 years old, though. He had a very good innings. Well done to him. And yeah, the Grand Prix will never be the same without him. Another legend we've lost. We lost Niki Lauda recently. John Surtees. There's a lot of great drivers we've lost recently, and yeah, it feels like the end of an era because he's one of the last ones of the 50s that was still knocking around. But yeah, very well done to him. But yeah, let's get on to the subject of our podcast today. We all voted on who we believed are the 10 worst drivers to compete in Formula One from the year 2000 to 2019. All they had to do was compete in one race. It doesn't matter whether most of their career was in the 90s or whatever. As long as they competed in one race between that period, they're eligible for this dishonourable list. And we got all of us, all the guys, even the guys that aren't in this podcast today, to vote on it and just aggregate it all together. So number 10 is Scott Speed. Now, ironically, on this list, despite his name, Toro Rosso, when they founded in 2006, Owain, they probably felt the need for Speed, but they didn't really need him. He was not a great driver for them.
No, yeah. He did a couple of tests in 2005 for Red Bull, but we won't call that a start. His actual debut race was with Toro Rosso once Red Bull had bought Minardi. During this time of quarantine and lockdown and everything like that, I've actually been, I've been going back and watching sort of, the 2006 and 7 season openers and watching races throughout that period. And at some point, it seems to be that every single race, Scott Speed will either make a mistake or go out or do something else. He doesn't seem particularly consistent. I have not seen him really. It's stuck in my memory as a bad Formula One driver, unfortunately.
That's a good way to sum up. I mean, he was in F1 for a season and a half, didn't score a single point. One of the few drivers that Red Bull have brought through and just not really been good enough for F1.
Well, he had a point taken off him. He finished 8th in those days. The point went down to 8th position in Australia in 2006, but he got it taken off him for overtaking on the yellow flag. And I remember in the stewards briefing with David Coulthard there, he had a bit of a confrontation with him. I think he swore at him or something like that, and got a further fine, which didn't help. But and that's pretty much his most famous moment in Formula One, I think. But it was a major coup for the Red Bull company, an American driver, which is obviously a great marketing ploy. He'd had a reasonable career in GP2 before that, but he wasn't really. He was out of his depth really in Formula One. He went on to have quite a bit of success in NASCAR, and I think I most recently saw him in Formula E, although I think he's done other things then. But no, he didn't have the greatest career. He was never really destined for great things.
No, I think that's a good summary of it. I mean, he's been in NASCAR, he's been in Formula E, but he's never really hit the mark there either. I mean, yeah, great crew for the Red Bull company to have an American driver like that, but pretty forgettable one, Dev. But I guess the good thing about Scott Speed, though, a lot of people forget him being dropped midway through 2007, let through Sebastian Vettel into the Red Bull system.
From where I see this particular instance, it's slightly strange for someone to have more than a full season up there and not being able to score a single point, forget the wins, forget the podiums or the fastest laps or whatever. 28 race entries rather, without scoring a single point. Not much that can be added there, frankly. But for sure, I'm sure Red Bull have seen better days. They're seeing great days right now. Probably that wasn't their time, was it?
Yeah, pretty forgettable driver in the bottom of our list, but there's a lot worse to come. Don't worry about that. Number 9, Roberto Merhi. Now, Owain, he's a pretty forgettable driver, but he's actually one of the few to go back into F2 and actually fail there as well.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I kind of forgot about Roberto Merhi. I've only known that I've had to go back and look through, and the Formula One section of his career is depressingly short, I'll say. He's made an appearance in Formula One for Caterham during practice, and they were evaluating for a race seat, but yet qualified for an FIA super license. Obviously, at that time, it was a little bit easier to get one. It has certainly changed a little bit since. And then, yeah, it's just kind of failed to set a lap time within 107% of the fastest time in Q1 in the Malaysian Grand Prix. Finishing 3 laps down on Sebastian Vettel, which is fairly typical actually. It's just not good. It's just it's not great.
I think
the high point of his career, I think, would be being a minute ahead of his teammate Will Stevens. I just completely forgot about him. Like, I'm learning about him right now. and it does not impress.
It's not good, no. I mean, like I said, he went to F2 after his very short F1 career, and he was pretty dismal there, despite, I think at the time being, I think he was in F2 last year, actually, the year before. He's like 28 years old. He's an absolute dinosaur in F2 terms. But yeah, not very good. He had an awful car in the Marussia, Alex, but he was a typical pay driver, really. Not really anything to write home about. I mean, he got plastered by Will Stevens, who wasn't exactly quick himself.
Yeah, I suppose in that Manama Russia of 2015, which was basically a 2014 car converted with the 2015 specification. Because remember at that time, that team had only just was pretty much on the brink here. They only just no, I'm wrong. They didn't even make it to Australia. They turned up and didn't even do a lap. So it was a very poor car. And that year, Roberto Meri was also racing in Formula Renault 3.5 series alongside his Formula 1 duties. And I can't remember when that, even in the old Formula 3000 days, it maybe happened a couple of times, but not a driver on a full-time position anyway. Yeah, he probably didn't have as much chance to show his true potential in that car. But as you say, Will Stevens kind of had the better of him, and there were probably drivers in the junior categories who deserved their place more than Mary and probably Stevens did as well.
Yeah, not a great driver. And we'll move on. We'll move on to number 8, Lance Stroll. Now, a guy that I think is a bit hard done by, to be honest with you, on this list, Dev. I mean, yes, he's not that great. There are drivers that do deserve his seat more than him. But at the end of the day, he came in as an 18-year-old into the sport, and he's learned his craft. And now, I don't think he's that bad, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, I second you on that, George. Cannot be that bad for a guy who's already secured a podium in 62 race entries. Never easy to break into the top annals of Grand Prix racing when you're a teenager. Not yet out of 13 years, let me put it that way. But fundamentally and statistically, to take nothing away from the great Nico Hülkenberg, still finding a podium which Hülkenberg lacked despite so many clearances, should definitely put the odds that are stacked against his favor in his favor. But I think, truth be told, Stroll is one of those guys who definitely finds himself in a bit of a precarious situation, simply because of the fact that, given the same car setup, exactly the same car setup, the other guy in his team has consistently punched, can you say, above his weight. It's not even about the fact that we should turn a blind eye on the fact that in the 2017 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it was still very early days career, he manages 18 other cars, but the 19th one as well, which happens to be his own teammate. So for as long as, from where I see, I could be wrong, for as long as he's not able to deliver, by which I mean outperform his own teammate, he would be perhaps just a bit too harshly, myself included. Because definitely there is this understanding we have in our mind that silver spoons are the golden in his case. Daddy Stroll buying all the opportunities out there for the son, but he's one of those complex in between characters. He can actually do a lot better. But is he really underperforming? We don't know. Still early days, but so many DNFs, and I've actually been studying some of his stats of late. 2 retirements in 2018, did throw the same number in 2019. The Spain and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix should have been contested fully. There you go. Hence, we're talking about him, aren't we?
Yeah, I think people are jealous because let's be honest, Owain, he has the seat at Racing Point because his dad owns the team. There's no two ways about that. But at the end of the day, partway through last year, he was outscoring Sergio Perez after the German Grand Prix, a race that Perez crashed out of. And like Dev said, Stroll has a podium, one more podium than Nico Hülkenberg.
Yeah, he has a podium.
By the way, sorry, at the German
carry on.
Sorry to stop you. So sorry to stop you. This reminded me what an amazing performance at the German Grand Prix by Stroll. It's his best all year, last year, I think, perhaps, yes. Was it the P4, if I'm not wrong? Because I think the best race, no, was it the 2018 German? No, I think it was the 2019 German.
It was 2019, yeah.
Yeah. 2019, yeah. Carry on, Owen.
Yeah. Compared to Nico Hülkenberg, I think it is a fair point you make, but obviously, Stroll hasn't contested a lot on. That's where I'm sort of putting. That's why I wouldn't drop Hülkenberg into this list. In comparison, I will admit it's easy to be harsh on Stroll because I think a lot of the F1 fraternity can often get away. the view of pay drivers is slightly low compared to someone who has had to make it into the sport on their own merit, which I think is a little unfair, bearing in mind someone like Niki Lauda made his way into Formula One by paying his way in. Obviously, it's worked out well for him, but I think there's a certain amount of sink or swim when you come into the sport like that. And I do take the point that was made earlier that Stroll came in very, very early and has had to do a bit of his learning in Formula One. And I think to a certain degree, the reason I keep him down here in the worst 10 of the 21st century is that it's not a finishing school. It's Formula One. You're meant to be a pretty complete package by the time you get here. Like you say, he's got a podium. He's making good points finishes. He is being outperformed. I think what has actually clouded judgment, I think a lot of the time here, is that again he is a pay driver and he's not having to fight his way every season to get a seat. He has one given to him, and that's why I think we've come to the conclusion that we have, to be honest.
That's fair enough. Yeah, it's easy to hate on the pay drivers, but there is a history of that. I mean, you go all involved back to the 50s. Fangio had backing from Argentina to get to Europe and compete in F1, and he's arguably the greatest of all time, definitely one of. Yeah, we'll move on. Number 7, Jolyon Palmer, Alex, and again another driver that's very easy to hate, but I think this one's a lot more warranted.
Jolyon Palmer was very much like his father in the sense that he had a good career in the junior categories, but his F1 career just didn't take off. And in 2016, he probably did reasonably well because that Renault was a bit of a dog that year. He was fairly close to Kevin Magnussen, but then in 2017, which was a better car, he just it all went to pot for him. He was qualifying towards the back nearly all the time. Nico Hulkenberg wiped the floor with him. It's a shame because he just had his best result, which was in Singapore that year, and then he was replaced not long after by Carlos Sainz. And he's now retired from racing altogether. He now works for the BBC as part of their F1 commentary team on the radio. And he's a very good pundit. But his driving career just never really hit the ground, really.
Yeah, he was thoroughly wiped the floor with by Nico Hulkenberg in 2017 and got replaced partway through the year by Carlos Sainz. But yeah, I mean, Palmer, a good pundit. I'd agree with you, Alex. I do think he's a good pundit. But Dev, not that great of a driver, a very forgettable one. That Renault in 2017 wasn't a bad car, but I think he only finished in the points maybe twice in that entire year. It's just not good enough, really.
Yeah, also very, very fortunate to find a young driver finding himself out of the top angle of the sport in just 2 seasons, 37 race entries, 35 starts, and still not able to find himself even a single podium, or okay, if the podium is tough, then anything substantial enough to salvage. But yeah, I mean, I would love to hear him behind the mic, maybe a bit like DC, really given that experience, because his columns are really informing. He's really a good weaver of words. He has good insight, but yeah, not everybody is destined or cut out for glory in the sport. Should we put it that way?
Yeah. So it's like Murray Walker says, those who can do and those who can't talk about it. Well, Palmer's talking about it now. So yeah, moving on. Number 6 on our list, Pastor Maldonado, and Wayne, I think quite possibly the fastest driver on this list, but woefully inconsistent.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between, I think it's been said before, but I steal from David Coulthard here, when he was talking about Grosjean at that time, but there's drivers who are fast and there's drivers who are good. I think Maldonado is fast, but he isn't he's just not sort of look at the qualities of a Formula One driver. You've got speed, being able to calculate, being able to just, race for the points when you need to, all these different things that make a great Formula One driver. He's got the speed, but he hasn't, as far as I can tell, he hasn't really got anything else. He's got the character flaws that are in just the right places that I think will prevent him from truly from being a regular race winner. That's why I think he's only got the one race win from 2012 at Catalonia, which that he has sort of shaken off Fernando Alonso to get that race win. But I think that was a crazy time, and he's benefited highly from the sort of situation at the time. That's why it's out heavily in his favour. So yeah, I think he's a fast Formula One driver, but he wasn't a good Formula One driver.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Really inconsistent. But yeah, on his day, Alex, which was very, very rare, incredibly fast. I mean, he held off Fernando Alonso, who himself is one of the greatest drivers of all time.
15 laps, I remember.
Yeah, incredible performance at Spain. Like, I mean, he had speed, Alex, and that's the thing that was so frustrating about him. But he had so many crashes too. I mean, the amount. I mean, yeah, he brought a lot into the team with his finances from Venezuela, but it would have cost him a lot in just in repairs.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, as you say, on his day, but I think he'll have one day, which was that fantastic race he did in Spain. It's like Korea, he had one perfect weekend, which was that weekend in Barcelona, and he drew a fantastic race that day. There were other success. There were other times where he showed promise. I think he qualified really well in Singapore, although that was the one time I think his car actually let him down rather than his mistake. But yeah, you're right. Pastor Maldonado. I mean, I first noticed him in GP2, and he was GP2 champion, but he was a teammate to Nico Hulkenberg. And Hulkenberg did far better than Maldonado did, and then Maldonado got Hulkenberg drive for 2011, and he made a lot of quite a few mistakes in his early part of career. But I thought the speed there, relying those out, but that never happened, and he just carried on making those errors. And his first year at Lotus was a disaster, if I remember right. I think he crashed in the once, and he crashed on his first lap out the pit, in practice bar one. So yeah, what you just said there is probably perfect. He brought a lot of sponsorship money to the team, but it'll cost the team a lot in repairs. In 2015, I think he was starting to get a little bit better, but by then the damage was done and his reputation had been cemented. And when Renault bought Lotus, they didn't really need his Venezuelan anymore, and it was adios, really.
Yeah, and out he went. Yeah, I mean, Dev, him and Romain Grosjean were an interesting pair for Lotus in 2014. I mean, again, the damages, the amount they could have cost him. I mean, and that really showed him up in a way, because like the one thing that he had at that point was, you know, he was better than his teammates up until that point. But Grosjean outperformed him comfortably at Lotus.
Funny thing is that he was paired with a guy who's often a meme material called Crash John, and not that Maldonado is not called Crash Tornado. But for someone who actually became so ever easily a meme material in this incessant age of social media trolls, credit must be given to this crazy character for scoring 76 points. That's quite a lot given all the inconsistencies that are stacked heavily against him. But I think I completely second Alex's point that by the time he was actually coming to his own, it was unfortunately the twilight zone of his career. The 2014-2015 period is when the accidents may have slightly reduced, and we would have had a better possibility of seeing Maldo stands the crash Ronaldo part, but it just wasn't to be. He wasn't really allowed. I can't even say fair one because he'd had his fair share of accidents by then. But surprising character. I'm not sure if in Venezuela they've already released the stamp in his honor, have they? I won't be surprised because first Venezuelan driver to win a race, brilliant achievement. But then just how stupendously did he fall? It was just sudden. It was expected as well the way he was going, wasn't it?
Yeah, weirdly, a driver that has won a race and he's on this list. That's Formula One for you. You can have your good days, but he had a lot of bad days. So moving on, Luca Badoer, number 5 on our list, and Owain only in here because I think he had 2 races with Ferrari in 2009. Most of his career is in the 90s, but I think he goes to show that you can be a great test driver. He was a test driver for Ferrari for over 10 years, but that doesn't make you a good racer.
Yeah, and I think as a test driver, he's probably, I think that the skill that would mark him as a good test driver rather than being a good Formula One driver would be the ability to sort of understand the car and understand how to develop a car, give good feedback to the team, give them what they need to understand what they need to do. Of the bulk of his career being back when we could test, so sort of 2008, like basically pre-2008, I believe. Unfortunately, there isn't the raw speed, I don't think, within him that you seem to see in people like Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton. If we go down the list of very, very good Formula One drivers who can understand how to extract a car on the limit of grip, those are the ones. I wouldn't even put Kimi Räikkönen up there. He's a world champion, but say Kimi Räikkönen, I think, is also is experienced in to develop a car in the same way Badoer is. Obviously, Raikkonen's got a bit more speed. I think just Badoer, clearly a good test driver. Clearly was giving great feedback, especially in the sort of era of Ferrari's dominance, but just not a great Formula One driver when it came to racing.
Yeah, he definitely didn't perform when he was given his chance in 2009, Alex, when Massa had his horrible accident. I mean, I remember there being a catalogue of errors in those 2 races he did, though. I mean, you've got a photographic memory when it comes to this sort of stuff. Like, what went wrong? I know he finished really low down, but he also made some really bad mistakes too.
Well, he was hampered by the fact that this was at the time when, as Owain just alluded to, they just stopped in-season testing then. He wasn't getting the amount of mileage that he normally would do. And that 2009 Ferrari was a pretty difficult beat to tame in the first place. He got his chance as a thank you, really, for his years of service with them, which was a lovely gesture, but it turned into a nightmare pretty quickly. He was constantly at the bottom of the timesheet throughout the practice session, qualified on the back row. And then nightmare race, the second race at Spa, he crashed in qualifying and again finished last. But Noah holds the unenviable record, let's put it that way, of the most entries without a point. But he's also unfortunate of the fact that the point system was different in the 90s. If they'd had the current point system, he would have scored quite a few points. And then we probably won't be talking about him as much as we do now. Certainly won't be talking about him as much as we do now if he hadn't had that ill-fated stretch at Ferrari. So I think he gets a bit unfairly treated because of that, because he was so underprepared. He'd not driven a Formula 1 car for a while. He'd not raced for 10 years, and he was 38 years old by then. Because Giancarlo Fisichella didn't really do any better either. So it's a bit harsh on Bedoya, really.
That's a very fair point, actually, yeah, because Fisichella really struggled when he went to Ferrari too, in the same car. Bedoya struggled more, but yeah, he was older, so that's fair enough. I get that. But at the same time, we can see why he's on this list. Number 4, Nelson Piquet Jr., Dev. Now, obviously, Nelson Piquet, 3-time world champion, great driver, questionable personality sometimes in the sport, but he got the job done. His son, though, is remembered for all the wrong reasons.
Like being man Friday to Fernando Alonso's devilish plan. I don't know, that's challenging here. But definitely a bit unsound driver who was perhaps a bit underrated as well, because he was quick. But then at the end of the day, maybe, car control and consistency, these are the kind of factors that you have to factor in at the end of the day. But my end, I would have been very, very happy to see Nelson Piquet Jr. latch on to something more commanding in Formula 1 than making new scroll. We must also not forget that maybe it doesn't strike us that hard, but there's always this gray zone, this dark area, fathers being amazing champions, and then, the posterity having had to face that pressure, that the expectations, they're just humongous. Maybe, who knows, that may have also weighed in some form. So.
Yeah, and Owain, another driver that got a podium as well that's on this list. There's quite a few of these drivers have had some good results, but again, it's the consistency, and I think he's so high on this list because of the expectations. I mean, I know Alex, I'll get on to Alex, but I know Alex put him on there as the worst in the 21st century.
Obviously, yeah, he's got a podium, and the Renault wasn't uncompetitive in the years he drove it, especially in 2008. Obviously, it was a race-winning car, although I'm about to get on to why. He's just not that good. He's good, but he's not. He hasn't just got that extra 5 or 10% that makes you an amazing Formula 1 driver. Unfortunately, I think his career, and I don't think anyone will really forgive him for this, unfortunately, his career has been marred by the Crashgate incident at the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, which looking back, I've never seen any other example of race fixing that I could find. So it's the only one in the sport, and he has the unenviable, basically, position of being the only driver to deliberately crash out of a Formula 1 Grand Prix, I think. There's just a little bit of integrity when it comes to that you have to put into question when someone who would bend to the will of. I understand Flavio Briatore is probably a very, very imposing figure, but bending to that will, and if you're maybe feel that your seat is under threat at that sort of stage in that year, then you would bend to that. I can totally see that happening. Obviously in 2009, then he got dropped, and as a bit of retaliation, he's shed light on this. But yeah, he's not a good driver he's not really a bad driver. I think he's just being brought down by his sort of stigma, essentially, if that makes sense.
No, I get you there. I get you. It's not just about the driving. It's also about the expectations. It's also about what he actually did with it. Because I filled this. Everybody's, I think, filled this out in slightly different ways. I personally filled this out as just the 10 purely worst drivers, just on their performances in the F1 cars. But I think both you, Owain, and Alex have filmed them out in slightly different ways, because both of you put PK Jr. as the worst. I mean, Alex, do you go along with those reasons as to why you put him as the worst as well?
Yeah, my judgment on this is it's inspired by a few years ago. This is not F1 related, but Top Gear released a DVD of the worst cars in the history of the world. But the reasoning was it was because they were made by manufacturers who should have known better, and they clearly made a botch job. There was obviously really terrible cars, but there are ones that should have been good but weren't. And this is the same thing with Nelson Piquet Jr. I mean, he had a fantastic career in the junior Formula. He was British Formula 3 champion. Went toe to toe with Lewis Hamilton in GP2. I was very excited when I heard that he got the Renault drive. I think he should have got it the year before at the time, and then it just did not deliver at all. And I know he had Alonso as a teammate, but that excuse only gets you only gets you very far. He had a world champion father. He couldn't say he was a fair driver, and his career is sadly remembered for Crashgate. But what we're forgetting is that if that had happened, he would have been fired, because that was a way of him staying in the team. I only remember him in Formula One most, apart from the second place in Hockenheim, but he was forever spinning off and costing the team points. And that's the reason why he's my worst driver, because yes, there are drivers who didn't achieve the results he did, and probably some drivers who are paid drivers who shouldn't have been there in the first place. But PK Jr. was a driver who should have been in Formula One, but when he got there, just showed that he couldn't do it.
Is PK Jr. your worst driver as well in the 21st century? Let us know in the comments below. Let us know on YouTube. Tweet us at F1 Chronicle on Twitter as well. We're interested to hear your views on this, because everybody's got a different take on all this dishonourable podium, beginning with Rio Haryanto, Dev. Now, this is a guy that's a very forgettable driver, despite driving so recently in the sport. He was only in it for half a season, but failed to impress, really.
I would have to apologize because I haven't really seen much of Haryanto. I've
Nobody
seen
has.
The other guys. Yeah. So I'm probably not the guy to answer this question particularly, because I was thinking, in fact, if I could just add on to just a perspective I was wanting to ask actually all of you, and this is me taking the liberty of turning the tables and asking you guys one question before we proceed further. What do you guys think of Vittorio Liuzzi and guys like Bruno Senna? I mean, these guys also have so much of potential, and it saves my mind to understand that we haven't really picked these guys.
They didn't make the list overall. I mean, Liuzzi was disappointing. Senna was really disappointing. I'm surprised Senna's not on here, actually, Bruno Senna.
Right.
We'll segue a little bit. I mean, Heikki Kovalainen was a driver that both Owain and you, Dev, highlighted as being on this list.
Yes, I remember in the chat, Owain and me are on parity with this. Kovalainen desperately underperformed. Yeah. Wasn't he also?
I have words to say about Kovalainen.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, go on, Owain. Have a rant about Kovalainen, probably the worst.
So before we get into our top three of worst drivers, I have thoughts about Kovalainen, and looking back on it, he got one win and two podiums, and one of those podiums came from that win. I think he was gifted, essentially, the McLaren drive through a very, very toxic relationship between McLaren and Alonso. Alonso goes, I can't remember how the contracts were working at that time. I don't know how long Alonso was initially signed for, but Alonso, I think, would have been on a multi-year deal. So that says to me that to fulfill the contracts, Renault and McLaren probably came to an agreement that they would swap Heikki Kovalainen and Fernando Alonso. And unfortunately, I think, obviously, you're up against Lewis Hamilton as Heikki Kovalainen, so I sympathise, but it's a world championship winning car, and even Rubens Barrichello got more wins than that in a world championship winning car, and that was a very dominant car. So I don't understand how he didn't get more than one win. Obviously, I think he was certainly gifted the win in Hungary by a retiring Felipe Massa. You obviously have to be second to pick up that win, but he was in no other position to take another win. He was gifted it, right? And the great drivers and the good drivers take wins rather than being given them. So I think he benefited from that seat. He then got immediately demoted after 2009, back down the grid again. I think he was lucky to get the McLaren seat in the first place, and I he's even worse than Perez in that McLaren seat. He's really not good. I just can't. I can't put him as a good driver, unfortunately. Probably the worst driver to ever be in a McLaren seat.
He's definitely down there as one of the worst for McLaren. Yeah, I mean, Dev, I could tell you've got some words to say about him as well. I mean, let us know what you think about him and maybe Bruno Senna as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll first begin with Kovalainen, a bit of an enigma, the only man to race for two Lotus teams, Lotus F1 and Team Lotus. Bit of a crazy thing there, but highly underperforming Finnish driver. Definitely, when you have the likes of Raikkonen coming in from that part of the world, you definitely have these expectations from the other guys to do. And I absolutely second Owain's point about having the great opportunity of driving a McLaren car that was as good as any, driving alongside a great. But yeah, he just couldn't do it. Sometimes would you rather feel that some drivers were really lucky to actually even break into Formula One, get the kind of cars to drive which they actually did, and then just cutting a frail figure? But I would actually, personally, if you were to ask me, I would be more disappointed with Bruno Senna, and it's got nothing to do with his illustrious uncle and the great surname that he has inherited. It's the very fact that this was a guy who we don't know. The first two seasons in Formula One were utter rubbish. First year, 0 points. Second year, 2 points. Final year, which was the last for him in the top annals of the sport, the very top bracket, he scored 31 points. Was there another case where a guy was actually bettering himself, but he found himself right at the edge beyond which there was a point of no return? Bruno Senna could have done so much more. I still remember being there at, the, sounds very strange and eerie to call, the former Indian Grand Prix venue, which today, thank God, is not as in shambles in terms of physical infrastructure. But I remember being part of the crowd where people were holding placards and saying that Senna Part 2 is here. And gosh, was that a hair-raising feeling or what? But I'm not sure at the end of the 67 laps there was anything but that. So I personally expected Bruno Senna to do really well because, one of the facts we obviously perhaps also come to forget is the fact that when he tested a Formula car for the first time, which I think was back in Canada in 2008 or something, he was just 0.3 seconds off Jenson Button's pace. Now that's not a fluke. That's a great position to have. So when you truly indicate immense potential and that flickering pace, you do expect that this guy's gonna go far. Because let's face it, the way you break into advertising thinking that you are creative, which is why you step into the world of advertising. You step into Formula One knowing that you have pace. This guy had car control as well, but just didn't have it enough to perhaps go the extra mile, to make something consistent out of it. And hence, what a flop.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dev, genuinely. I think he's a real shout for this list because he was worse than Maldonado. He was worse than
I just
quite
hope
a
I
few
don't
drivers on
sound
this
condescending,
list.
guys. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I was just purely expressing my thoughts.
No, hey, it's your opinion at the end of the day. It's not condescending. It's a fair reflection, genuinely. I mean, Alex, who would you highlight for a dishonourable mention on this list and someone we've not mentioned?
Well, I was going to say about Bruno Senna, I'm slightly more favourable towards him simply because, similar to Damon Hill, he had very late start in his career, but he didn't really start racing properly until I think he was in his early 20s. So he was years behind all his rivals. So the fact he made it, I know the name might have helped to some extent, but I think he still did well enough to get to Formula One at least, and it is his ambition. It didn't really work out, but I want to put him on my list. I think we'll mention very hard. I think.
I mean, you've put the likes of Grosjean, Nakajima, Liuzzi, Bourdais. They're all on your list.
Yeah. It's difficult for me to just single out one. I think the name because of all of our reasons. I think Sebastian Bourdais was a disappointment because he'd had a immense success in the US. I thought it was long overdue a Formula One drive, but as usually the case with circumstances like that, it just didn't work. And Sebastian Vettel demonstrated then just what potential he had, and Bourdais could not live with it, and then eventually was dropped midway through 2009. And it probably didn't help the reputation of US racing because we've already know there's that stereotype that drivers who do really well in American racing can't make that transition to Formula One. I know Jacques Villeneuve and Juan Pablo Montoya did, but lots have come and not succeed. And Bourdais was. I remember there was an article at the time that said if Bourdais can't do it, who can? I think that just comes to it.
There you go. There's some definitely disappointing names in there. Let us know who your honourable mentions are as well. Let us know your top tens for this. But yeah, no, we'll get back onto the podium, Owain. I mean, it's a tough one to kind of sum up, but third place, Rio Haryanto, only had half a season in the sport, and I think being third on this list is a bit harsh, but at the same time, he didn't really do much, did he?
No, and I think sort of the worst thing that can happen to you as a Formula One driver is being dropped mid-season in your first season. Normally, most teams will commit to one season just to see what you're like. But if you get dropped, mid-season, it's a bit of a. I was planning to use it earlier, but it's a bit sink or swim in Formula One. You see the good drivers will oftentimes be promoted and then get there. But we promoted to a race seat through usually through bad luck, unfortunately, on the part of another driver. So in the case of Senna, we had David Coulthard coming through. In the case of Sebastian Vettel, in the case of Robert Kubica, we had Sebastian Vettel coming through. They were going to break into the sport anyway, but to swim when they were given a race seat on very short notice, I think is a testament to their talent. Whereas, the opposite is true here, where they've been given a seat and unfortunately they've been dropped mid-season, which I think is the most damning sort of thing to happen. If you're only in for 1 year and you're only really in for half of that year, that says everything we really need to know. The teams don't keep drivers. The teams do keep drivers as long as possible, but if they think it's not working after half a season, that's a clear indication to me that they are not good drivers, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's really my thoughts on it.
At least Esteban Ocon managed to come through in his place. That's something, I suppose. But yeah, pretty forgettable driver, Haryanto. Now, Dev, I think this is your time to shine. Just give some insight on the man, the myth, the legend that is Narain Carter-Kane. Second place on our list, the cucumber. Now, be honest, I'm sure you remember him coming through at the time, but what was the kind of reaction in India? Because I think he is the first Indian F1 driver, isn't he?
Let me tell you a very, very candid example and a real life one of that. Last year, during peak summers in India, I got an opportunity to interview the man himself. This is actually for a lifestyle blog portal. And I went to this one crazy end of the city I live in, which is New Delhi, to interview him, never knowing that my wearing a Kimi Raikkonen t-shirt and then asking questions about Formula One may not just have been the best thing to do. Because at the end of the session, after he signed the autograph on the book and everything, he said, you might as well have interviewed Kimi. But I mean, the kind of fans that he still commands, the kind of rush that still gathers all around him speaks of the respect that he has. And something away from the annals of F1, he has been decorated with the fourth highest civilian honor India has for its famous personalities. It's called Padma Shri. So he's in a way Sir Narain Carter-Kane. But any of that glamorous imagery kind of dismantles it on its own the moment you realize that 48 races, 46 starts, 5 career points, and God knows how many retirements. So definitely he was one glorious chapter in making. Definitely did the country proud because he was the first Formula One driver from India to reach that top bracket. That's the only way you would put it. But his Hispania racing team that just didn't click for it. And you can't even put a foot down saying that he was a guy who was doing good in his first year and then somehow he had to be picked up and then luck didn't have it for him because he was just not able to put together a highly committed lap. The kind of basics you need right from the start of qualifying, before the D-Day called the Sunday even approaches. So that was a bit of a letdown. This time it was a letdown to see Karan Chandok spending time inside the commentary box and not on the track. He could have spared us a lot more horror, but so Carter-Kane is a bit of a sad tale because he's a guy who we can't forget is doing so well in the Super GT series. He's made a name for himself in Japan, I can tell you that. His PR manager is still a good friend. And he raves about him. He feels that wherever he goes, he definitely has a way to get those lucrative contracts, which are not the Formula One kind of contracts, but definitely a career, which in hindsight leads quite decent, but again, one of those people who just couldn't be Formula One. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure he's a huge star in India, but yeah, not a great F1 driver. It's typical pay driver, I think, is a fair tag for him. He is comfortably at the top of the list with our final driver, who is Yuji Ide, the man, the myth, the legend himself as well. Alex, only 4 races in F1, but he really never, ever should have been there, should he?
No, he shouldn't. No, certainly under today's super license ruling, he wouldn't have. Well, he did win the Formula One Championship, I think, or he did well in it because and he was very good friends with the Guru Suzuki, and that's why he got the drive in the first place. He wanted to set up a Japanese team, but he couldn't speak any English, which meant that he struggled to interact with the team. And if you look at some of his on board, he couldn't get to grip with that car, which it was very nice. It was a 4-year-old car, but still, he should have had a bit more of an understanding than he did. And he made a lot of errors, and the big one was the tangle he had with Christian Albers in his last race in Imola, where the FIA stepped in and actually revoked his super license, and that has never happened. And another time I can recall, which showed that drivers like that should really have not got to that level in the first place. And it never will happen again because of the points required now to do it. That's the reason why I didn't put him as my number one, because he's a driver who should never have been there in the first place. But we'll just stick to the fact that he is, on ability, I would say, yes, he probably is the worst Formula One driver of all time. But because he should never have been in there in the first place, he's not mine.
Fair enough. I mean, he was there, though. That's the point. And yeah, he just wasn't at it, was he, Owain? I mean, a guy getting his super license took off him so fast as well. It wasn't even after like a series of incidents. It was just like, right, this guy's just clearly not good enough. 4 races is all it's took.
Well, yeah, it's following advice from the FIA that he was dropped from the team, and that's. I mean, I've never heard of that. The only other time that it's a different form of racing, but the only other occasion that I've ever heard of or ever seen really a driver, just clearly not being with it enough for the sport they're in was probably, I think it was last year's Le Mans with, I can't remember the driver's name, unfortunately, but it was Patrick Dempsey, Proton Racing. That 6 hours into that race, he'd caused 3 or 4 crashes and caused the team to retire. Hadn't even got the required amount of hours. It's the same here. It's just he's barely got the amount to actually qualify for a super license. Clearly shouldn't have got one after having being kicked from the team by the FIA essentially, and then having a super license revoked. That's he finished one race, and it was a 13th place out of his 4-race career. That's and his best qualifying effort was 21st. So because Kimi Räikkönen didn't complete a qualifying attempt. So I just think it just says. I think it just says it all, doesn't it? The stats all point to him being awful.
It is terrible, isn't it? I mean, in the 90s, the 40 team were the reason why they brought the 107% rule in. I think part of the reason why they tightened the super license regulations were because of Yuji Ide. So that's the kind of influence he has. But yeah, so that is our list. That is our bottom 10, top 10, depending on how you look at it. Next week, we'll be having the best 10 drivers of the 21st century. Again, voted by a panel of unrivaled experts on the Good Talk podcasts.
Unrivaled because no one has chosen to rival us yet.
Don't say things like that. Thank you, lads, for joining us. Really do appreciate it.
No, you're welcome.
Right. Yeah.
Apologies for any audio issues.
Sorry for having dialed in quite late.
Oh, it's okay. No worries, Dev. Thank you for joining us on here. Apologies for any audio issues. Dev's coming all the way from India, and I've had Rex in the background for part of mine. He's calmed down now, thankfully.
No, fine. Just being the second hour, this was disappointing too.
So we are also available on YouTube. Just search for F1 Chronicle, F1 Grid Talk on there. Same with Spotify, same with Google Podcasts, Apple Music. Just search for Grid Talk Podcasts on there. Be sure to follow us, like us, comment and everything. We do content regularly, even though F1 has unfortunately stopped for the time being. I found still need things to listen to, especially with being at home so much. We're also available on Omni Studio, Pocket Cast. We have a Reddit if you want to suggest things to us, if you want to suggest rolling a haircut or anything like that, especially me. But, no barbers are open, so good luck with that. search for new F1 podcasts looking for feedback. And also we've got a Patreon as well if you want to invest in some better Wi-Fi routers, some better soundproofing equipment for us all. Search for Formula One Grid Talk on there. And yes, like I said, we'll be back next week with the 10 best drivers of the 21st century so far. Have a think about who your list will be for that, and send us your list for the worst drivers as well on this show as well. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Right.
And